Lover is the greatest Taylor Swift song of all time, which to June means it's the greatest song of all time.
That's not what the people came here for, Hsu Ken. Welcome to our first ever live stream on Startup Academy. This is our first AMA with Hsu Ken. What's the most common question you receive on growth?
I think the most, maybe there isn't kind of one common question, but most of the questions are kind of like, they're reformulations of the same question, which is how do I grow? Right. And so I think there's lots of different ways to ask that question, but it's all kind of the same, which is just like, how do I actually kind of like grow? And I think people think that growth is more almost kind of like straightforward. There's like a process where you're like, okay, you do this, then you do this, then you do this, $1 billion company, right? And it's like, it's not like that at all, right? It's like very kind of trial and error. It's very kind of like you try lots of things, 99% of them don't work. You're trying to figure things out. And so I think maybe people think that it is more straightforward than it actually is, as more straightforward if you kind of like know the trick, and there's just kind of no trick. But I think a lot of people ask some version of kind of like, I run this startup. How do I get 1 million users? And I'm like, I don't know, man. Like, I don't know. Like, I can tell, we can talk about how to figure that out, but like, it's not like I just like magically kind of like know how to like grow any startup, right? I've had lots of stuff that didn't work. So I think that's probably kind of like it. June, you probably see some of this when we work on kind of recruiting, even for Iterative, right? It's like, it's not magic. Mm-hmm. It's like, you kind of slug it out, right? You're like, okay, try this thing. Okay, that didn't work. Okay, you try this thing, you know, and you're just kind of like slugging it out.
Yeah. Would you say that's a common mistake people make?
I think so. And I think that applies to a lot of startups. I think they think of fundraising the same way, where they're just like, I have this startup. How do I fundraise? And it's like, I mean, there's a lot of nuance. And so, I don't know. I sometimes I kind of think in my head and I kind of joke. I'm like, do people think that just people who have done startups have like a secret that we only kind of tell other people who have done startups? And like, if you know the secret, then you're going to be really successful. Like that doesn't exist. There isn't just like magic secret organizations where we're just like hoarding all the secrets. Like that's not how kind of this works. And so fundraising, I see that a lot. Growth is kind of like that. I think everybody kind of thinks there's a kind of like a 3-step guide to stuff. And the thing I always kind of think about is nothing valuable worth knowing has a 3-step guide. Like everything is much more nuanced than that. I tried raising 2.5 million, had a good VC calls, but all of those 4 told me to get back when they execute, all that kind of stuff. Okay, a couple of comments here. If you only talk to 4 investors, you did not try to fundraise. The thing that we typically tell our companies is you need to talk to 70 investors if you're like have kind of like a chance of kind of fundraising. So 4 is like nothing. 4 is like, sometimes when we're fundraising, I talk to 5 in a day, right? So to me, I'm kind of like 4 is not enough. And so if you're really trying to fundraise, you should talk to a lot more kind of like investors. It's not so surprising to me that they're kind of like will kind of like wait for kind of university partnerships. And so I think that's kind of that. I think the other thing too is, I don't know what stage you're at, but you are like waiting on these university partnerships, but you're also trying to raise 2.5 million. And if you don't have any kind of revenue yet, there's no way you're raising 2.5 million. Like nobody's raising 2.5 million on no revenue. And so I think you need to talk to a lot more kind of like investors. And I think you need to adjust kind of like how much you're raising and probably your valuation based on kind of like the stage in which your kind of like company is in. So university partnership soft commits to a VC mean nothing. Like I can go to June and be like, June, do you want to soft commit to kind of like buying my product? And June's like, yeah, sure. Like means nothing, right? So I think VCs are kind of like, probably you need to talk to more. Soft commits don't mean that much. You probably need to kind of change your pricing a little bit.
I believe Kevin bootstrap, launched MVP, and he's getting sales traction. So he asks, what growth metrics do you recommend for B2B SaaS startups?
Got it. I mean, revenue. Like that's the kind of the biggest one, right? So if you're B2B SaaS, you need to get kind of like, if you're doing monthly kind of recurring, so it's MRR. MRR is the number everybody will like look at. And so I would look at MRR. Maybe this is maybe just to share how we kind of think about metrics when we talk about companies. We often think about input and output metrics. And so the way that you think about that is your startup is kind of like a machine, and it outputs a certain thing. So you can think about your startup as like, okay, we need to output MRR, right? And so, okay, cool. What are the things that, what are the metrics that drive MRR? And that's typically kind of like signups, kind of like sales, price, and all of these kinds of things. And so I would just use MRR as kind of like my North Star metric. And then I would come up with 3 to 5 metrics that drive MRR directly. And then I would focus on working on those metrics to kind of that. And if you increase those metrics, you should increase your MRR. But I tend to think about it that way. B2B SaaS, I think, relatively straightforward. It's like signups, trials, kind of conversion, kind of like those kinds of things. It's pretty straightforward.
How has the past 2 years changed you as a VC? And how are you advising your portfolio companies when it comes to taking risk?
Past 2 years have not changed me as a VC at all. It doesn't really, I don't know. I don't think it's kind of changed me kind of like much. I guess if you're referring to the last 2 years, I think you're referring to kind of like the markets were really cold. It was kind of like there wasn't a lot of stuff happening in the last 2 years and all of that kind of stuff. So I think you're referring to that, Vincent, if that's not what you're referring to. Hasn't changed kind of me. We're trying to invest. I mean, June has been here through the last 2 years. We have not slowed down in investing. We're like trying to invest more. And so I'm not more risk averse. And frankly, I think having been a founder before, like being a VC, like doesn't feel like as risky as being a founder. And so there's nothing about being a VC and risk that scare me compared to being a founder. I invest in like 200 companies as a founder. I worked on one. So, I'm not kind of like worried about this. It's also the markets are cyclical. Like this was always going to happen. I think it's actually good for the ecosystem. And so, I mean, if I'm being super capitalistic, the best time to invest in companies is when other people aren't investing in companies and you get lower like kind of valuations and stuff. And so if other people don't want to invest, I'm very happy to pick up all of it. So like that's kind of what we're kind of focused on. Okay, advising our portfolio companies when it comes to taking risk. I think there's a couple of things that we kind of advise. One is, and look, we're just practical about this. Raising money is going to take twice as long as you're going to raise half as much. And so I think when you're doing the kind of like, when should I fundraise, kind of like, okay, calculating burn rate, all of this kind of stuff, I think you're just kind of factoring this kind of like, you're just factoring this kind of things in. Fundraising is also a sales process. And so you just have to kind of understand kind of like who your customers are kind of like where their heads are at. In this case, investors are, I think for the whole, not us, but I think investors in Southeast Asia in particular are kind of more conservative. All of a sudden they kind of care more about kind of like profit and they care more about revenue. And so I think you just have to kind of adjust for some of those things. But I think your long-term goal as kind of a founder is kind of like unchanged. You're still trying to build the thing to solve problems for your customers. All of this is just kind of like tactics and strategy to kind of like survive long enough to kind of be able to do those things. And so I think just very practically, but I think we want our companies to still be kind of taking risk and all of that, right? And so, you know, if they're really trying to solve people's problems, you have to take some level of risk. We did not tell our companies to like pack it in and don't do very much, right? Look, you work at a startup, like you came here to kind of do stuff, so do stuff. But again, I think just be kind of realistic about kind of like how hard it is to fundraise and kind of the amounts and all of that. Maybe one thing I'll add is I've seen more deals in the last 3 months than the previous 18. And so so the fundraising market seems to be heating up quite a bit. We're seeing a lot more deals in kind of our portfolio, if that helps.
Yeah. Okay, maybe a follow-up question is, where do you think the fear comes from? Like, is it like from media?
For investors, like why are they scared?
Mm-hmm.
Well, this is on our own channel, right? So I don't think there's other investors here. Look, most investors, especially in Southeast Asia, are kind of like Me Too investors. And so they just kind of follow each other. And so I think if one gets scared, then the other one kind of is scared. And so they're all kind of like, you know, the fear becomes infectious and kind of just like spreads. If you work things out from first principles, I think there's kind of like less kind of like fear. But maybe let's put it this way. If there's a room full of people and you do the same thing as everybody else, nobody thinks you're dumb kind of like later, and you get along with everybody. If there's a room full of people and you're the only person that's doing something kind of differently and you are wrong, you get ostracized, right? Now, if you are right, you're also the king. But I think like fear of being ostracized actually kind of, I mean, there's lots of psychology studies on this, right? But fear of kind of being ostracized is like much more powerful of a driver than kind of like becoming kind of like successful or whatever. And so I think most people kind of fall to that. I think maybe one of the benefits Brian and I have is we're very happy to look dumb. Like, I think if you've been a founder before, you're so used to looking dumb that like, I don't care if investors think we're dumb, right? But these are the cards that I want to play.
Went live with the platform in September, got 40 sign-up clients. Is that a good number? So context is it's a B2B platform based in Ho Chi Minh, self-funded. But I guess maybe the question is like, founders just want to know like where they are, like, and is it good? Because like there's no benchmark, right? Maybe talk more about, yeah. Yeah,
and Lene, I have no idea if 40 is good or bad, right? If it's like 40 of the largest companies in Vietnam, then it's fantastic. If it's 40 kind of like your friend stores, then kind of like maybe not so much. So it's hard to kind of like say, and it's also kind of dependent on kind of the place that you're at. If 40 of them have signed up and none of them have paid you, not as good. If you have 40 of them have signed up and they all have paid you, then like better. So I think and this goes with kind of, people often ask me like, I have this many users, I have this much revenue, like, is that enough? And I'm like, I don't know, right? Like there's no kind of like magic metric across everything. Everything is very kind of nuanced. Everything is like, depends on how long you've been working on it and all of that. Maybe the thing that I'll kind of share is we look a lot more at trajectory than we do at kind of absolute numbers. And so if you started last week and you have 40 B2B customers on your platform or signups on your platform, that's kind of impressive. If you've been working on it for like 3 years and you have 40, it's a little bit less impressive, right? And so I think you want to kind of factor in kind of like, what is your like trajectory, right? If you had 40 for the last 6 months and you haven't added any other one, less impressive. And so I think that's the kind of thing to think about. But hard to say, there's no kind of hard numbers with it. I think hard to say. Again, I also think kind of like revenue is probably kind of a better metric. That's what you should kind of be going for. I mean, 40 doesn't sound bad, but I don't know if it's good or not. Hard to tell without kind of digging more into the company.
Why is it tough to even get feedback on an idea from accelerators or investors? This means VC's scope of field is very restrictive, like a syllabus.
Oh, I mean, this is very straightforward. We get like 2,000 people that apply every 2 months or like 3 months or something. Like, there's no way that like we can reply in like really good feedback and detail to like every single one, right? So accelerators get more kind of applications than, but investors get quite a lot too. But it's just kind of a time thing. It's like, I'm sure the person who asked this question, I'm sure if you looked at your email right now, you probably have 20 founders who have asked for your feedback on their product or some product that they've worked on and you haven't replied to them, right? Like, you get busy, right? And so I just think it's really hard because of the volume. We do give a reason at Iterative. If you apply to Iterative, you will get a reason for why we're not investing. They're not like super tailored because again, I think that just takes a lot of time. So that's one. Two, investors want to keep their optionality. So if June applies to, this doesn't happen at Iterative. We're like, we want to come out with kind of a conclusion, but let's say that like, June is running kind of like, I don't know, VC fund ABC, and I applied to kind of VC fund ABC. June could tell me no, which could close the door, and then it turns out that I'm working on something really cool, and then June is like, oh crap, I told them no. Or the thing that June could do is basically like, oh, maybe talk to me in 6 months, or talk to me after these soft commits or whatever, and she's basically preserving her optionality, and what she's saying is, I'm not interested right now. But like maybe in the future, which by the way, even when investors tell you no, that's really what they're saying still is, but email me in kind of 6 months. There's no investor no that is ever kind of a no. Like they're in the business of trying to kind of invest and, businesses kind of change. But I think there's a practical kind of reason for why it's hard to give feedback at kind of scale. And then there's the kind of like optionality one.
Mm-hmm. Maybe another way to tackle the question is, why do you think founders want feedback from investors? Where do you think it comes from?
Yeah, I think two things. One is I think it's very natural because I think there's a power dynamic between investors and kind of like founders, where it seems like investors kind of like know what they're doing. a spoiler to everybody, investors do not know what they're doing, including us, by the way. Like we're not the end all. Like just because I think an idea is like not good does not mean that like the idea is actually not good. I've been wrong tons and tons of times. But I do think if you're just kind of starting out, investors seem like the people who kind of know what they're doing. And so you're like trying to win their approval. And so you want to get feedback from them. Maybe kind of the second part is the people that you really should be getting feedback from are your customers and the people who are using your product. I always tell founders all the time, it's like, yeah. I have my opinion, but like any kind of like customer that you're actually kind of like trying to get has like a much better kind of feedback. You should pay attention to their feedback much more than you're kind of like paying attention to kind of like mine. But I do think it's kind of natural that way. Plus, I guess from a fundraising standpoint, founders are trying to get money from investors, and so they're like, why isn't this investor giving me money? So that's probably kind of a part of it too. It's natural, I get it, by the way they do.
Okay. All right, let's move on to the next question. This is from Bub Labs, very cute name. If an MVP has traction in the market, however, there are 2/3 competitors in the market, let's say Singapore, should MVP be cheaper, smarter, better by 10x to validate the viability of the MVP?
Gosh, all of the above? I don't know. Look, I think the thing that I think about is it depends on the stage of the market. So if you're like in a very early stage market, and what I mean by that is like, let's say you're building some like AI tool. There's going to be 10,000 competitors in that market, and it's totally fine because it's kind of new and the game is not over. Like the game has not been won. And so I think that's fine. You can just kind of like compete with people. If you are working in an industry that's been around for like 20 years and there's 2 or 3 very entrenched large competitors, then that's a very different game. Not that you could not win, but like that's a different game. Should your MVP be cheaper, smarter, better? That's 100% up to the customer, right? Like to me, I'm like, you just need to build whatever product that the customers think is going to be better than your competitors and in such a way that they would rather use your product. So sometimes that means making a cheaper product. Sometimes that means making a smarter product. Sometimes that means making a better product. Again, to my original point of like, don't listen to investors too much. This is one of those cases where it's like, you just need to work on the one that you think customers are kind of care about more. And then go find out if they actually kind of care about those. If you can't get people to switch from your product or your product churns a lot, you probably aren't focused on kind of the right ones. And so that's how you should think about it. If you're trying to validate an MVP, I would do 3 different tests. One test that is about a product that is cheaper, and I would do another test with a product that's smarter and a product that is better, and I would compare across. And so what let's say you're doing some kind of like consumer thing or whatever, I would make 3 different landing pages with the same product, but I would talk about them differently based on the value proposition. And then I would run ads to all 3 landing pages, and I would compare conversion rates and kind of like funnel and CAC and all of that. If it turns out that the one that talked about being better is so subjective, but like cheaper was like, the conversion was 10 times better than the other ones, then like maybe cheaper is the thing that people care about. So that's how I would test these kinds of things.
We're finalizing our MVP. It's a legal tech SaaS, and they want to validate the actual usage of the product. Can you give advice on how you can get such kind of professional interested in dedicating their time and effort to try their technology? Basically, they're looking for someone to test out their MVP. How should they go about it?
Okay. Okay. I guess a couple of things here. There's 2 ways that you can tackle this. Is you can make sure that your product is very kind of like useful, and you can target people who think your product are very, very kind of useful. I think one of the things that people often don't think about is sometimes the best way to make your product useful is like go find people who think it's useful rather than kind of trying to like make it useful for somebody who doesn't automatically kind of like think it's useful, right? Like the thing I kind of think about sometimes is June is a big Taylor Swift fan. And so if you are selling Taylor Swift sweatshirts, sell them to June, not me. Like don't spend your time trying to make a nicer Taylor Swift sweatshirt to sell to me, like just sell to June. So I think with this legal tech stuff, it's kind of like, I don't know what the problem you're working on, but I would go find legal firms that face that problem kind of like more acutely. Like, I mean, we've invested in a few legal tech law firms are like quite different depending on kind of the types of cases that they kind of work on. And so whatever your product does, whatever problem it solves, I would go find the legal kind of like company that faces that the most acutely, right? So I don't know if yours is really good at like reading documents or something, go find the legal tech companies where it has the most documents. They all have some, but like who has just like unbearable amount of kind of like documents, and start there. So that's one piece. Second piece is oftentimes when I'm talking to companies about kind of MVPs and products, I think about product surface area. What I mean by that is there are some products that try to do a lot of things, and so they try to support a lot of surface area. So they're trying to build kind of like a lot of stuff. So you can just think about a wide area. When you're an early stage startup, you don't have a lot of resources, and so you can't support a good experience over a wide surface area. And so what I tell companies to do is pick a very small surface area, put all of your resources into that, so that is really good, and that is your product, right? So merging that second one with my first one, find a legal tech company that feels the pain that you are working on very acutely, then try to figure out kind of like what's the simplest, smallest problem that still matters for them, and then build a really good product just for that. Those products end up looking like just like tools or kind of like toys, I guess, as people are kind of fonder of saying in the beginning, and then you can kind of build out from there. And so I think that's how I would kind of like think about that one. Sorry, are you asking me if willingness to talk is validation, or is he saying that?
He's saying that.
Okay.
So he's replying to that.
Maybe a quick point on that. I don't think that is validation. Okay, but maybe let me talk about my like stack rank. So there are different things. I think of different types of validation having different value. So if somebody's willing to get on a phone call with you, that is more validation than if somebody signs up, because getting on more of a phone call is more of a commitment this person is making to learn about your product than signing up. So it is more valuable than that. So in that case, yes. It's not more valuable than them paying you, though. Not even close, right? And so I think the most valuable source of validation is will people pay you or not? And so maybe the stack rank is like they sign up, they'll get on a call with you, they actually use your product. So that is like retention, or kind of like they're actually using it for kind of thing, and then they pay you, right? So that's probably my like stack rank of like which ones are kind of more valuable.
Got it. So how founders should think about it is have a stack rank and know that they mean different things.
Know that they mean different things, and then try to get the more valuable one. You're like moving through the ranks, right? It's like, okay, you're just starting out. Just try to get people to sign up. That's it. Just get people to sign up. Okay, we got some signups. Okay, cool. Can we get some people on the phone? Okay, we got some people on the phone. Okay, can they try my product, or can I like, will they actually buy it? And so you're like moving down the kind of like stack, right, into kind of the more and more valuable. And there's things I've worked on where I've like talked to lots of people, like 300 people. They all say they want to use it, but I can't get any of them to pay me money. And I'm like, okay. They're like video game levels, and I couldn't pass that next level, right? And so you want to kind of like advance through like video game levels.
We are at bootstrap early stage with running version for B2B SaaS. They're kind of like in between validation, building, and getting early users. Very slow and steady signups while they fix bugs and high churn rate, for the reason that our bigger competitors already have what they're looking for. So basically they're in a dilemma if they should apply to Iterative and raise funds, or should they continue to validate it and build further?
For the reason that our bigger competitors already have what they are looking for. I mean, I guess the thing that I would kind of think about is anytime when it comes to competition, it's like you need to figure out kind of like what is your differentiation, right? So like if it sounds like you're in a space where there are larger competitors who are somewhat entrenched. And so maybe to back up, make this useful for everybody. When you're building products, you're winning customers in two types of ways. One, you're winning a customer who is not previously using a product to kind of like solve this problem, right? So they're not using anything. It's a totally new field, and you got to win those people. So like for most people, when ChatGPT came out, nobody was using kind of a AI kind of like assistant, right? So now ChatGPT basically was like, we created this new category, and now we're like getting people in this category. If you were trying to make a new search engine, you are winning customers from an existing player, like Google, for example. And so whenever you're working on a company, you're like getting customers from one of these two places. You're either getting customers who aren't already using something, or you're stealing customers from someone else. In very competitive spaces, like I think this is what this is, you're stealing customers from somewhere else. And so you need to kind of figure out what is the thing you are banking on, or what is your differentiation such that like people are going to want to leave this other kind of product and use your product. And you need to have kind of like a good understanding of that. If signups are slow, then chances are that what they're seeing on your like homepage is like not resonating with them enough to kind of like change. And then churn could be a bunch of reasons, but basically it's kind of not working yet, which is okay. Like that's what you do. You get to work and kind of fix it. Should we apply, raise funds, or should we validate and build further? I mean, I guess this depends on kind of like a lot of different things. Like, do you need the money or you don't really need the money? To me, I'm kind of like, I think you should validate further, just because I think it's going to be really hard to raise money if you have very slow, steady signups and your high churn rate. Like typically not things investors are kind of like super excited about. And so I think I would work on fixing those things, then raise money. If for no other reason, then I would hate to see you try to fundraise and then basically spend a bunch of your time trying to do that and it be kind of like, and never get anywhere. We see that quite a lot. Like founders try to fundraise for like 6 to 9 months and they don't get anywhere. And then they kind of just lost all that time from building their product. So I would probably try to work on that first. You don't have to have it all figured out to fundraise, but I would try to have a good understanding of what your differentiation is, and then some evidence that like, hey, we're getting pretty decent signups, you know, the churn rate's not that high, like show that you're like, you feel like you're onto something, maybe is the right way to put it.
So he has a question, and he wrote quite a bit, if you want to take a look. But I think this question is on growth hacks, and how would you recommend to increase customer base in his specific, I guess, scenario?
Okay, develop and already onboarded 5,000 plus drivers. Okay, $30 initial registration. Okay. In such a
and then that results were underwhelming for them.
I think. Okay. Do you remember when I was telling you that most questions are kind of around like, how do I grow faster? And I'm kind of like, I have no idea. This is kind of like one of those cases where I don't know. Like, and maybe the reason why I don't know is the best growth strategies are unique to each company. And so if you're doing a growth strategy that works for any company, it's probably not a very good growth strategy. And because, again, I think the best growth strategies, and the reason why that's the case is because the best growth strategies come from some insight that you have about your customer that is non-obvious. And so if you have some whenever we're building growth strategies, we're always thinking about like, something that we've kind of learned about our customer, and then we can use that to kind of get more of that customer. So hard to kind of say without understanding kind of more of the business and why you feel like it didn't work and all of this kind of stuff. The thing that I would try though is, I don't know how many engineers are on the call, but I would do breadth first search, and what I mean by that is when I'm trying to come up with new growth strategies, I try a lot of things a little bit to kind of see what seems kind of promising, and then I prune and invest more from there. So I might try like 10 different channels, and then I'm like, okay, cool. Out of these 10 different channels, what worked better? Okay, get down to 5, then get down to 3 channels, and then I'm kind of like, okay, which of these 3 channels am I going to kind of really spend a lot of energy on? Should we consider blending online and offline? 100%. Like, you're in Bangladesh? Oh my gosh. And all of our Bangladesh companies, all of their growth basically came from some offline thing, like all of them. Prioshab, Gozayan, Aroga, like they're all kind of like offline. So yes, you should definitely do that. But again, I think, and by the way, this is a good way to tell whether people are like giving you good advice or not. If they're giving you very generic advice that kind of works for everybody and they can tell you the growth strategies now, they probably kind of like don't know what they're talking about, because the real growth strategies are like, I would need to understand what your business is. Why do your customers use you? Like, you know, why do you think this didn't work or whatever? But without being able to do that, you should think expansively in the sense that kind of like, yeah, definitely try other stuff. Maybe you should try iterations on the referral thing, but like, you should also kind of try other stuff. The referral thing, by the way, should kind of work because that worked for most marketplaces. Like it worked for Grab, it worked for Uber, it works for like almost everything. So I'd be surprised if it doesn't work for you. But something is not something is not kind of like resonating. So I don't know.
Mm-hmm. And in the program, that's how we work with founders, right? Basically, we like trying to debug what the problem is, work on it, iterate. That's how it works.
June, you're so good at marketing now, the program now. Yeah, so basically, if this was in the program, I would actually dig in with him about kind of like, okay, what is happening with the referral program? How does it actually work? Okay, what are your customers saying? Like, what are they doing? Like, and I would get that context so I could give you kind of like specific advice, but like outside of that, I don't do that outside the program because it takes a fair bit of time, and that's kind of what the program is about. But yeah, that's what we would do in the program. Is I would dig in really deep with you on that.
Nice.
Wow, June, so good.
Gotta keep up. If right now your product is Singapore focused with solid metrics and traction, with no thought or viability with expansion possibilities Southeast Asia, should you still go with it?
Whoever Bub Labs is, has not been considered or explored. I don't know what you mean by go with it. Like, it depends. Like, what do you want to build a company for, right? If you want to build something that is venture backed, then yeah, you're probably going to have to kind of think outside Singapore. If you're kind of like thinking about if you are happy with kind of running the business as is in Singapore and like that suits your lifestyle and that's going to make you kind of like, however much money you want to make, then don't have to think about it, right? So that's a choice that's totally up to you. Maybe the thing I'll extrapolate for is it's possible to build a large business if it's only in Singapore, if you're making a ton of money per customer, because there's just not that many customers. But if you are going to try to build something that's kind of like very venture scale, then like, you probably need more people. But that question is totally up to you. Like, if you're happy with what it is in your business, then keep doing that. Like, don't worry about it. And if you want to do venture, if you want to be venture backed, then you probably have to kind of think about expansion. But by the way, guys, as a venture capitalist, I spend a lot of time talking people out of venture capital. It's not the only way to start a business. It's not appropriate for all businesses. I actually think most businesses should not be venture businesses. And there's nothing wrong with those businesses. Like, don't feel like I have to start a venture back thing. You don't have to.
Hi, Hsu Ken. We're just finalizing the looks of our web app, and they're targeting user signups in the next 2 weeks. They have about 10 people, like students, helping them in the marketing, and students can support them up to 3 months. His worry is after 3 months, the marketing might slow down if they don't have the revenue to hire more marketers. Any advice?
It's so funny. I feel like human beings are like so fascinating, and founders kind of especially. First order problems first. And what I mean by that is like, you have them for the next 3 months. I would spend all of my time trying to figure out like, and you're just doing an MVP. Like, after 3 months, you may not want, you may stop working on this product. Like, you know what I mean? Like, and so to me, I would spend all of my energy in the next 3 months being like, cool, I have 3 months. I'm going to work as hard to grow this thing as quickly as I possibly can. At the end of those 3 months, then I'm going to see whether I think I should continue working on this or I should change this. And so to me, I'm like, you have much bigger questions to ask yourself at the end of the 3 months than like, what am I going to do with 10 student interns? Like, I mean, if it's going super well, this is a non-starter problem like that. And even if it's not going well and you're working on something new, honestly, you can find 10 new interns. Again, I would just focus on the 3 months rather than what's going to happen after the 3 months. Don't worry about it. Like, when you're so early and kind of MVP and kind of like, we used to think like 1 week in advance, by the way, when we were working on MVPs. So the idea that I would think we just never thought that far in advance. 1 week at a time, try to kind of figure out whether this is like something you should work on. And then after that, you'll figure it out, right? Yeah. You may also find out that kind of marketing is the wrong way to do it. So honestly, there's so many scenarios where it's like, this just won't matter in 3 months. So don't stress about it. Worry about the next 3 months.
Joy is at the point where making okay money, but not enough to hire someone full-time. I'm leaning towards part-time or sticking with interns. Any other ways of getting help as I'm stretched and I feel like I'm being a blocker now for company growth?
Leaning towards part-time or sticking, any other ways of getting help as I'm stretched? I mean, I guess... I was starting to kind of think about what your kind of like end goal was going to kind of be, right? And so there's a part of me that is like, if you're making kind of okay money now and you're kind of like where this is, then you maybe don't need to do anything. If you're making okay money now, but it sounds like you kind of want to make more, then I think the thing I would kind of think about is, actually my first reaction was, maybe the trick is prioritizing. Maybe you should try to do less, right? So I think oftentimes I tell this to my starters sometimes, they're like, how do we do more? How do we do more, right? And some of the ways to kind of like get more is kind of by doing kind of like less. And so one thing you could look at here, and again, you might be super good at prioritizing, I have no idea. But one thing I might like look at here is just like, what are these people working on? And are the things you're working on kind of the highest leverage things that you could be working on? My hunch is, I mean, if you're anything like me and all the other founders, you're probably not actually working on the highest leverage thing. I mean, there's some things that you probably are, but there's probably a set of things that you are not. I mean, this happens to me at Iterative all the time, where I'm like, there's definitely things at Iterative that I do and I probably should not do. But like and so I got to kind of root those out. But I think that's one thing to think about. The other thing to think about too, and I don't know how much the part-time and the interns cost, but we've had some founders realize that they actually get more done for less by hiring full-time people. So they let go of the part-timers and let go of the interns and got one full-time person. So if you're replacing like 5 part-time people and 1 full-time person, they actually got more done because that full-time person is more invested and they have all the context, and they tend to be kind of like maybe more senior. It's harder to get really good people on a part-time kind of, especially kind of intern basis. And so sometimes you actually get more value for less people, and you're just paying that person kind of more, and you're taking that money. And so that might be kind of another thing. And then the other trick is co-founders, maybe. I don't know if you have founders or not, but like that's kind of like another thing. But again, you would have to kind of give them kind of equity and that kind of stuff, but you're kind of betting for the like long term. So I think what prioritization, and then maybe kind of like prioritization, and then maybe kind of thinking about like actually kind of like hiring a full-time person with the money you're kind of spending on part-time or interns. Again, if we were working in the batch, I would sit down with you and being like, what are all the things everybody is working on? And then I would force you to stack rank that into kind of like 3 levels of importance, like P0, P1, and P2. And then I would ask you to track your time. We do this at Iterative. Brian audits his time. I do this once in a while. And we basically look at, we have stated priorities on how important everything is, and then this is how we're actually spending our time, and do those 2 things match or not? And oftentimes they do not match. And for me personally too, right? Where I'm like, oh my gosh, I say this is like super important, but like I never do any of this. I say this is really not important. I spend so much time doing this, right? I'm like, so you can do some of those kind of like audits.
Yeah. By the way, fun fact for people, at Iterative, working in between teams and just within the team, Hsu Ken has a rule where we can exceed a certain number of projects. And if you exceed it, he'll call you out and be like, you cannot do this. You need to prioritize and pick 1 or pick 3. So in case it's helpful for anybody.
That's a good point. That's my rule. You can't be working on more than 3 projects in any kind of like given week. Like you just can't. I don't believe in it. And I think what ends up happening is that when you are, and this is to Joy, I think when you're a founder, everything looks really important. And I think it turns out it's not. And so you really have to kind of figure out kind of what it is, which honestly, what's really interesting about that is that's more of a personal journey, because I think you have to like let go a little bit of like, this is not going to be that important. This is not going to be that kind of thing. I'm just not going to do this, or like whatever that is. Right. So,
Yeah. I had a hard time letting go, for sure.
Yeah, June. Yeah, June is kind of the best type of person where I'm like, I never had to push June to do more. I had to push June to do less because she would just stretch herself kind of like so much. Yeah.
Okay, moving on. Next question from Joel Wong. Could you briefly talk about some growth metrics that an early stage startup should focus on, both B2C and B2B? And what are the broad targets that we should aim, and tips for achieving these?
Gosh, there's like so much in this kind of like question, and for B2C and B2B. Okay. Here's maybe what I'll try to give kind of like a useful kind of generalized kind of like answer, because I mean, I could talk about this kind of forever. Okay. All products, whether B2B or B2C, basically kind of break down into kind of 4 parts. Growth, which is how many people have kind of signed up for your product. Activation, which is what is the thing that they take in order to kind of like actually experience your product. So for example, you could sign up for Grab, but you haven't actually kind of like tried Grab. So it isn't until you've like taken a ride with Grab that you've actually tried Grab, and we call that activation. So there's kind of growth, which is like signups, and then kind of activation, which is how many people have actually kind of like done the thing. And then there's 3, retention. And then the 4th one is monetization. So how many kind of first level is how many new people can you get to sign up? How many people are actually kind of trying your product? And then the 3rd one is how many people stick around after kind of like whatever retention kind of cohort you want to look at. And then the 4th one is, can you make money off of it? So there's 4. Same with B2C, same with B2B. I think about all products in this way. And so you can use that kind of framework and kind of think about it. And then depending on the stage of your startup, you reorder that priority. So for very early stage startups, you actually prioritize retention quite a lot, and you don't prioritize monetization very much, kind of like at all. For kind of B2C, B2B maybe kind of like a little bit kind of like different. And so you're reprioritizing. As a company gets very late stage, they like are all about growth and monetization, basically, and that's because they figured out the retention piece. And so you can kind of reshuffle these kinds of like pieces. And so I would think about your kind of metrics in terms of that, and then kind of work that way. If they don't sound like growth metrics, I think maybe this is a good opportunity to kind of explain that. That whole funnel, growth, activation, retention, monetization, that's all growth. The reason why is people often think about growth as top of funnel. But if you're adding 100 users every week and you're losing 75, you're actually only adding 25. Right. And so growth, what it's really about is kind of like active users, and that ends up being, well, what's your retention? And then what are you doing top line? And so we have some startups that are like, literally they get like 1,000 signups a week, and by the next week, none of them ever use the product again. You're never going to get very big when that happens. Right. And it's way harder to get a new user than it is to retain. And so if you're just losing everybody kind of out the back, then kind of like it doesn't matter. So, and activation is important because it's very hard to keep using Grab if you've never actually taken a Grab. And so the key to kind of retention ends up being kind of activation, right? And finally, like at some point you need to make money. So yeah, maybe that helps. Broad targets. I don't think I have targets are too hard. Like there's no one size fits all for kind of like all these targets. Depends on the space, depends on what you're doing, whatever.
And if there's some conversation happening on co-founders.
Awesome. Should we talk about co-founders?
Joy was saying that she did try to look for co-founders, but it's tough to find the right person. And then someone actually said, "Oh, I think it's better to be a solo founder." And then like conversation is ongoing.
Got it. Do you want me to chime in on that?
Let's do it.
Okay. It is better to be a solo founder than work with a co-founder that is dysfunctional. So to me, I'm kind of like, but if you have good co-founder, I think that's the best, right? And so I would not take a chance on somebody as a co-founder. I would need to kind of feel pretty good about them. And if you don't find anybody that kind of like fits that, I would just be a solo founder. It's definitely kind of the way to go. But having kind of co-founders is kind of like very helpful. So, that's kind of how I would kind of think about it. Before I kind of answer this question, let me kind of put the disclaimer about raising money from friends and family. It's not bad. Investors don't think of it as bad. There's nothing kind of like bad in that way about it. Be careful though, because I've seen people raise money from friends and family and then it kind of like be very difficult on personal relationships. And so I just want to caveat from people that like, there is this added component when you're raising money from friends and family that like, this is like, a personal relationship that's becoming a professional relationship. And when it comes to money, it's kind of tricky. My typical rule with this, which is very kind of like weird, but I'll just be very blunt about it. I only ask friends and family who I think are rich and who can stomach losing the money. Because I think in those cases, they tend to be they're kind of more okay with it, right? So like, I wouldn't ask a friend of mine or a family member who was like, they're going to put half of their life savings into my company. Absolutely not. Like, I'm not taking their money, right? That's like too much pressure. And if I lose it, then we're going to be in trouble. So anyway, caveats on kind of like friends and family, totally fine to do it, but just, be mindful of kind of like people's situations. And I've had, not personally, but I've had people in my kind of like friends and stuff kind of like lose friends over this. Okay. In early stage, if we take funds from friends and family as a loan, how should we structure and present this loan? I don't think there's, I mean, to me, a loan is just a loan then, right? So I think you're just getting a loan from friends and family. And so you structure it like a loan. And I don't think it creates any kind of negative impression to kind of investors kind of like going on, as long as like you think the loan can get, investors are not going to want to kind of like be very involved if the loan is kind of dragging the company down. And so I think the thing that I've seen this work is, if it's going to be a loan, is it going to be a small enough amount where it can kind of get paid off kind of like when the investors kind of come in, or kind of whatever that is. I would probably not do a deal in a company if half of my investment is going to pay off the loan, right? Like, I think that's a bit tricky. And so I think you just kind of have to think about it. But Xiaofei, if you want to email me kind of specific financial kind of stuff, right? So you probably don't want to share, but if you want to email me kind of specifics, I can help. But I would do it like a loan. Hopefully it's kind of not for too much, and hopefully there's some kind of time component where you can kind of pay this off before you kind of get to the investors, but I don't think it's necessarily bad.
I'm curious your views from the VC side. How do you view growth for your portfolio? If you're doing more than 7% weekly growth, you're hoping to become your unicorns. What are your hopes? The majority of companies that don't look like they'll make it.
I mean, of course I'm looking for unicorns. I mean, that's what. So yes, like we're all looking for that. Everybody's looking for that. Blah blah blah. Whatever. Like, you know, that's kind of part of the game. How do you view growth for your portfolio? I would like them to all be unicorns and grow super big and blah blah blah. Whatever. I don't think that's kind of the question. What are your hopes? The majority of companies that don't look like that, they'll make it. Look. I would like every company that we invest in to be like wild kind of like successes, but the reality is that very few of them are going to be. Very few, like shockingly few, right? We've invested in like 150, and the number of them are probably going to be unicorns are like 2 if we're like super good at our job, and like it's shockingly small, right? Does that mean that I'm disappointed in all the other founders and I never want to talk to them again that we invested in? Absolutely not, right? Like, look, I've been a founder before. I understand how this game is kind of played. That's kind of what it is. The only responsibility that founders have I think, to me, when I invest in their company is that they put in good faith effort. And what I mean by that is, if June is starting a company to sell Taylor Swift sweatshirts, and I invest in June's Taylor Swift sweatshirt company, then as a professional, as an adult, I understand that not everybody in the world may want Taylor Swift sweatshirts, and I am taking this bet with June that we think there's going to be a lot of people. June can do everything right and it not be successful. And in those cases, then I'm perfectly fine, because I thought June was going to be right. June thought she was right, and she worked really hard to kind of make that happen, and it didn't happen. I don't have anything to complain about, right? So I hope they're all super successful and everybody is kind of like the one and all of that kind of stuff. But I mean, the reality is kind of like, that's not going to be the case. And the only thing I kind of hope for is people will put good faith effort in, and, you know, we do our best to kind of support them. But that's it. That's it. I mean, yeah, I don't think it's fair for me to kind of expect much more than that. Right. I also tend to be a very process-oriented person, so I focus more on kind of the process. The outcomes they'll kind of like happen as they come.
He's unable to transition to growth stage because there's a lack of funding. If you could kindly talk to him, guide him.
Okay. The reason why I kind of like chuckled at it a little bit is, my opinion, it's never a lack of funding. Everybody that I talk to at Iterative, when I'm one of my reasons, one of the questions that I always ask in Iterative interviews is, what's keeping you from growing faster? And I almost always, oftentimes the founder will say funding, and I almost always kind of like, that's almost kind of like a negative, bad answer for me. And the reason why is, oftentimes people, when they say kind of money is a resource, right? I want to know what the resource is being used for. That's the problem, right? And so to me, it's kind of like, the problems are kind of like, hey, we're having a hard time kind of reaching this part of the market because of kind of like this. Okay, that's a problem. Money may help with that, but that's not the problem, right? I often find when I point this out to people and I'm like, what is the money going to be used for? I often get generic answers that are kind of like marketing or like brand awareness. And like, those are not real things, guys. Like, those are not things that people kind of like put money behind, right? The thing I would want to know is like, hey, we've been running this small sales pilot with a 5-person sales team. We've been working really hard on it. We've got the conversion up to this percentage now. I need some kind of funding so that I can hire kind of 10 more of these, because I think we can scale out kind of this, like the thing that we've been doing with these 5 salespeople to kind of 10x more salespeople. And so we're going to kind of do this and we're going to do that. Okay. That makes more sense to me, but kind of like funding is not typically kind of the problem. And so even all the companies that I've worked with in our batch, if they say funding is the problem in the batch and we kind of dig in more, it almost is not the kind of the problem. Funding is the thing that just kind of is an accelerant, but it's not the thing that kind of starts. And so, although we've been testing the product for past, we are unable to transition in a growth stage due to lack of funding. I think email me. I just don't believe it. Like, I don't think that's your problem. My hunch is actually that like, if you can't grow at an early stage, then my hunch is that you're like not targeting the right people, or you're not kind of like, sorry, if you're at an MVP stage and you're not growing, it's almost never because of funding. It's almost always because you're not targeting the right person, or you're not talking about your product that in a way that they care about, or third, which is always possible, you're working on something that's not a big problem. It's always kind of like one of those three. Yeah, at the MVP stage. Later stages, maybe it is kind of a money thing, but not in the very early stage. Yeah, this is really kind of straightforward. I would split out the kind of two, and so we've seen this in the past. So basically, if you're a founder and you put money in, then I would have those as 2 separate buckets. And so you should be a founder kind of equity holder, and so your founder equity shares are kind of worth this much. And then I would also put yourself as kind of like an investor, kind of like equity holder, and you should have the kind of same terms as somebody that would come in as an investor, and then you just have both sides on your cap table. That's it. So you just separate it out. You don't have to mix. It's very clean.
What are your thoughts about needing a technical co-founder? So this person is a non-technical solo founder, and I believe he like wanted to consider learning to code. Yep. Any thoughts?
Look, nothing magical. Look, as a technical kind of like person, there's nothing kind of magical about kind of like having a technical kind of co-founder. I'm very kind of like practical about this. If you don't have a technical co-founder and you have no problems with kind of like technical issues or building a product or anything like that, then you don't need a technical co-founder. In your case, it sounds like you're working with some engineers and you're kind of struggling a little bit with kind of technical issues. Then you might need one, right, to kind of help you solve that out. And so I think to me, I'm just practical about it, right? If you have a lot of issues with engineering and it's kind of like not working, then maybe you need a technical co-founder. And if it is working, then don't worry about it, right? There's nothing kind of magical about it. And so I think about it that way. I consider learning code, but I don't know what would be the best use of my time. It probably isn't, to be honest, kind of the best use of your time. And again, you can email me what your actual technical problems are, and I can kind of tell you whether those are things that could be solved by like you learning how to code or not. But like you learning how to code still may not solve those problems. And so I think it just depends on the problem. But if it's a problem, maybe. If it's not, then don't worry about it.
If you are still here, thank you so much for staying and answering your questions. Hsu Ken, parting words before we all jump off.
I was going to ask you what the best Taylor Swift song is.
It is this song called Lover from her album, 7th album, I believe.
You heard it here. Lover is the greatest Taylor Swift song of all time, which to June means it's the greatest song of all time.
That's not what the people came here for, Hsu Ken. Give an actual parting.
Actual kind of parting thing. Okay, maybe I'll kind of say this as a parting thing. Lots of questions, people kind of working on stuff. If you're kind of feeling like this is really hard, I don't know what to do and all of that kind of stuff, you are not alone. Everybody feels this way, including me. Including me when I was you and including me now. And it's just part of the process. And so everything you're figuring out, all the stuff you're kind of working through, all the questions that you guys ask, all part of the process. No indication of like whether you're not going to be successful or you're going to be successful. No indication. This is just all part of the process. And so Yeah, I think there's a lot of people that deal with kind of imposter syndrome when they're kind of like working on these things. And I think the thing I would say to all of them is like, none of these are indicators that you should or should not kind of be here. You should, if you want to build stuff, the world would love to have you. I would love to have you. So, but yeah, keep building stuff, solve problems, do the math.
Nice. Guys, keep building, and we're always happy to help. Lots of people are saying thank you. Yes, we will host more of these. If you guys want it, you will have it. We will deliver. Thank you guys again, and we'll see you guys soon.